Rip it up. He's not our kind." The agent's voice rang out sharp and deliberate as she tore the black man's $150,000 VIP lounge pass in half right in front of him, letting the pieces flutter to the floor while the whole room watched in heavy, complicit silence. No epalidi, nos jam. Just the brutal certainty of someone who believed he didn't belong. Want to know what happens when the man they humiliated decides he's done playing by their rules? Keep watching. Like this video, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you'd do if you saw this happen. Marcus Taylor had never thought a simple afternoon layover would turn into a defining moment of his life. He walked into the airport terminal with a calm confidence, the sort of unassuming ease that came from a lifetime of hard work and quiet resilience. The polished floors of the exclusive VIP lounge gleamed under the afternoon sun, filtering through the giant glass windows. Travelers sat in plush armchairs, sipping imported coffee, tapping away at sleek laptops, their murmurs low and dignified as jazz music drifted from concealed speakers. Marcus adjusted his watch, feeling the familiar, reassuring weight of its gold face, a gift he'd bought himself after closing his biggest deal yet. He wasn't here to make a scene. He wasn't here to prove anything. He was here because he'd earned it. The pass in his pocket was more than a luxury. It was a promise he'd kept to himself since the days he'd ridden buses across town to the only job that would hire him at 17. Today, that pass cost $150,000 a year. But for Marcus, it wasn't about the money. It was about belonging in a space that had once been closed to him entirely. He approached the front desk of the lounge with an easy smile. The agent behind the counter was a tall woman in her mid-30s with sleek blonde hair pinned in a flawless chignon and a name tag that read Amanda. She barely looked up as Marcus approached, busy shuffling papers into perfect stacks. Afternoon, he greeted her politely, offering the pass between two fingers. Amanda's eyes flicked up, cool and assessing. There was a practiced sort of courtesy in her nod, but it didn't reach her eyes. She scanned the pass, her eyebrow twitching almost imperceptibly. She held it between her fingers, as if it might be unclean. "Is this supposed to be yours?" she asked, voice even but tight, with just enough edge to make the words bite. Marcus held her gaze, unflinching. "Yes," he said evenly. "That's my membership." Amanda sniffed lightly, her lips pressing into a thin line as she examined the card again. A hush seemed to settle over the immediate area, though no one else seemed to notice. Marcus felt the weight of her scrutiny, of the moment drawing out. "We have standards," Amanda finally said, the pause deliberate. Marcus felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. He wasn't new to this kind of dance. He'd seen it at boardrooms, at country clubs, in whispered meetings, behind closed doors. But here? Now. He kept his voice calm. "Is there a problem with the card?" Amanda's smile was all teeth, sharp and brittle. She lifted the card slightly, as if to hand it back, then in a motion that seemed almost rehearsed, she tore it cleanly in two. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet lounge. The halves fluttered to the desk, and Amanda let them fall as she spoke with forced sweetness. "We don't want any misunderstandings," she said, voice hard despite the saccharine words. "This lounge is for our valued clients." Marcus blinked once slowly, forcing himself to stay calm as the two halves of his pass lay between them like evidence of something broken and ugly. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. He let the silence hang, refusing to grant her the satisfaction of an outburst. Finally, he bent slightly, gathered the pieces carefully between his fingers, and met her eyes with a calm that belied the heat in his chest. "Thank you," he said softly, voice even, "for showing me exactly who you are." Amanda's nostrils flared at that, but she said nothing. The line behind him shifted, uneasy, but no one spoke up. Marcus turned and walked away, the halves of his pass in hand, feeling every stare he refused to acknowledge. Outside the lounge, he paused near a massive window overlooking the tarmac, the roar of engines distant. He closed his hand around the torn pass, exhaling slowly. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to make him feel small, but it might be the last time anyone tried it here. He glanced at his reflection in the glass, the sharp cut of his suit, the lines on his face that had come from years of refusing to bow his head. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and made one brief, deliberate call. His voice was low, calm as always. "It's me," he said. "Get things ready. I might need to make a purchase today." When he hung up, he stood there another moment, watching planes taxi in the distance, his face unreadable. He could feel the old anger simmering just under the surface, the kind he'd spent years learning to control. He wouldn't explode. He wouldn't yell. He would do what he did best. He would act. Behind him, the lounge doors closed with a soft, smug hush, sealing the privileged space away. Marcus pocketed the torn pass carefully, turned, and walked with measured, dignified steps toward the main terminal. He didn't need to rush. He had time, and money, and the willingness to make sure no one else would ever experience what he just had, at least not in his airport. He smiled to himself, though it was grim. Because if Amanda thought she could decide who belonged here, she was about to learn she didn't own the place. But soon he might. Marcus didn't hurry as he walked back into the terminal's central hall, the torn VIP pass pressing like a sharp reminder in his pocket. The buzz of travelers felt oddly distant, like he was underwater, every footstep on the polished tile echoing in his ears. He was still processing the precise, humiliating sound of paper tearing in Amanda's manicured fingers. He paused by a bench near the information desk, exhaled slowly, and forced his pulse to settle. He had made the call. Things were already in motion. He just needed to see this through without losing his temper. He turned back toward the VIP lounge, ready to at least speak with someone higher up and clarify the blatant insult he just endured. But as he approached, Amanda was already waiting by the rope barrier, arms folded across her neat uniform, her mouth twisted into a smile that was anything but friendly. She didn't even bother greeting him. "Didn't I make myself clear?" she snapped before he could speak. Marcus kept his voice calm, measured, deliberately unthreatening. "I'd like to speak with your manager." Amanda's eyes narrowed as if the request itself was an offense. "You don't get to make demands here," she said sharply. "You don't even belong here." The words landed like slaps, each one calculated. Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his expression neutral, refusing to give her the anger she seemed to want. But Amanda wasn't finished. She raised a hand, snapping her fingers twice with sharp authority. "Security." Her voice was loud enough to turn heads in the terminal. Two uniformed security officers approached from a nearby podium, their pace brisk but calm, the way men used to dealing with minor scuffles or stubborn drunks might walk. "Escort him out," Amanda ordered, pointing at Marcus like he was a stain. "He's causing trouble." One of the officers, a man with close-cropped hair and wary eyes, raised a brow at Marcus, assessing him quickly. "Sir, is there a problem here?" he asked in a rehearsed, polite tone. Marcus shook his head slightly, his voice even. "No problem on my side. I just want to speak to a supervisor." Amanda scoffed before the guard could answer. "He doesn't have a pass." He tried to bluff his way in. "We don't need this sort of thing. Get him out." Marcus turned his eyes on Amanda and held them there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He didn't plead. He just stared at her with unsettling calm. Something in that gaze made her shift slightly, discomfort flickering before she masked it again. But she gestured more forcefully at security. "Well, don't just stand there." The guards didn't manhandle Marcus. He wasn't resisting, and he wouldn't give them a reason. One of them gestured with an apologetic tilt of his head. "Sir, let's move along, please. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." Marcus's lips thinned, but he nodded once. "Of course." He turned with them, never looking back at Amanda. As they began to walk, she called after him in a sing-song voice meant to wound. "Don't worry. I'm sure the public waiting area will be more your speed." He ignored it, but he felt the eyes on him from passing travelers, some curious, some pitying, some gleeful at the show. He was halfway down the hall when another voice cut through the background noise. "Amanda," someone said in a tone of gentle reproach. Marcus turned his head slightly and saw a tall man in a tailored gray suit stepping briskly toward the scene. His badge identified him as Ethan, lounge manager. He wore the standard corporate pleasantness like armor. Amanda turned to him, voice immediately softening. "Ethan, good, you're here. I handled it." He tried to get in without a valid membership. Ethan's eyes flicked toward Marcus, then back to Amanda. His smile didn't waver, but there was something cold about it, something corporate and careful. "Is that so?" Amanda nodded enthusiastically. He caused a scene. "I had to call security." Ethan turned his attention back to Marcus, who had stopped walking but hadn't turned around fully. He looked the other man over carefully. "Sir," Ethan said, polite but detached. "Is there anything you want to clarify?" Marcus inhaled slowly, choosing every word. "I had a valid pass," he said evenly. She tore it up. Ethan's brow lifted fractionally. He didn't look surprised, exactly. More like he was logging the statement for future reference. He had no intention of acting on. "Well," he said, glancing at Amanda, "if there was confusion about eligibility, I'm sure we can process a complaint." His voice was neutral to the point of insult. Amanda crossed her arms, smirking. He thought he could sneak in. She supplied helpfully. "We don't want problems from people like him." Ethan didn't even blink. He just nodded once, as if that explained everything. "Understood. Thank you, Amanda." He turned back to Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the immediate area. You can discuss any concerns at the main customer service desk." His tone said clearly, "That's not my problem anymore." The security guards shifted uncomfortably but maintained their hold on either side of Marcus, though they weren't touching him. Marcus looked between them, then back at Ethan. His gaze was calm, but there was an intensity beneath it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just said, "Thank you for showing me exactly how this place is run." Ethan offered the barest shrug. "We have standards," he said. It sounded like a defense. It sounded like an accusation. It sounded like the truth. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he gave a small nod as if acknowledging a final chess move in a game he decided to stop playing, at least for now. The security guards guided him further down the concourse, letting him go once they were clear of the lounge entrance. Marcus straightened his tie, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. He turned his head for a moment, just enough to catch a final glimpse of Amanda leaning against the VIP desk, smug and satisfied. Ethan standing beside her with professional indifference carved into his face. Marcus let out a slow breath. He took his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't make a call yet. Not here. Not with them watching. But he thought about the contact name he'd dial, about the resources at his disposal, about the promise he'd made himself years ago that no one would ever tell him where he didn't belong. He slipped the phone back into his jacket and started walking, steps measured, spine straight. He would not forget this moment, and he would not forgive it. Not in the way they thought. Marcus continued down the wide, bustling terminal, his polished shoes clicking against the tiles in slow, deliberate steps that belied the storm roiling just beneath his calm exterior. He resisted the urge to look back over his shoulder at the gleaming doors of the VIP lounge, which now seemed to mock him with their discreet golden signage and velvet rope. He could almost hear Amanda's voice dripping with smug victory as she called security, see Ethan's bland expression of corporate indifference. He inhaled deeply, drawing in the sharp scent of roasted coffee from a nearby kiosk, and forced himself to remain collected. But his hand clenched around the torn remains of his VIP pass, the edges cutting into his palm like tiny accusations. He was not about to let this stand, not because of personal ego, but because he knew exactly what it meant to let such things go unchallenged. He passed travelers bustling for flights to LA and New York, families herding kids, businessmen barking into headsets. No one paid him much mind, though a few glanced curiously at the barely contained fury in his eyes. He made a sharp turn at the next junction and spotted the customer service and complaint counter in the distance, a glass-walled office set apart from the main concourse with sterile efficiency. The line was short. Marcus walked right up to the polish counter where a young woman in a navy blue blazer tapped at a terminal, her name tag reading Kim. She looked up with a practiced, blandly pleasant smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" Marcus set the halves of his torn VIP pass on the counter with a quiet finality that seemed to startle her. He watched her eyes flick down to the pass and back up, confusion knitting her brow. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," Marcus said evenly, voice calm but hard-edged. Kim's fingers paused on the keyboard. "Of course, sir," she said cautiously. "What seems to be the issue?" Marcus opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, a shadow fell over them both. Ethan had arrived. He slid neatly in front of Kim, inserting himself between her and Marcus with the practiced smoothness of someone who made a career of defusing situations without solving them. His smile was tight, the corners of his mouth barely ticking upward. "Marcus, wasn't it?" he said lightly, as if they were old friends. Marcus didn't bother acknowledging the faux familiarity. His eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed calm. "I'm here to report misconduct. Amanda at the lounge destroyed my pass and humiliated me publicly. I have every right to file a complaint." Ethan held up a hand in a patronizing gesture of calm, his gold watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Let's just save ourselves some time here," he interrupted smoothly, voice still dripping that polite condescension. "You can complain all you want, but our standards won't change for you." The words landed like a slap, sharp and ugly in their precision. Kim blinked, caught in the uncomfortable crossfire, her mouth slightly open as if she might protest, but Ethan didn't give her the chance. Marcus's mouth twitched once, and he let out a slow, controlled exhale. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at Kim for sympathy. He looked Ethan dead in the eyes. "Is this your policy for everyone?" he asked, each word carefully enunciated like he was chiseling them into stone. Ethan actually laughed, a short, cold sound with no mirth in it. He didn't even pretend to soften it for Kim's benefit. "For everyone who doesn't fit," he said bluntly. He gave the words weight, letting them hang in the air like a challenge. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Marcus didn't move. He felt the heat rise in his neck, but he forced his pulse to steady. Around them, the terminal hummed on, oblivious. People walking past unaware of the private war being waged in a few feet of fluorescent-lit space. He noticed Kim's eyes dart nervously from Ethan to Marcus, her fingers tapping at the keyboard, though she wasn't typing anything. She swallowed hard, clearly wanting to vanish. Ethan's smile returned, broader now that he thought he'd won. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Look, you seem like a smart guy. Why waste your time fighting something you can't change? This is how things work. Always has, always will." Marcus absorbed the words with an eerie stillness. He realized Ethan genuinely believed them. This wasn't personal spite alone, it was policy, culture. The corporate rot that let Amanda act the way she did without fear of consequence. Marcus felt a deep, cold anger pool in his gut. He straightened his posture, rolling his shoulders back slightly, his tailored jacket settling like armor. "I see," he said quietly, voice low and even. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't plead. He let the silence do the work, his gaze boring into Ethan's, unblinking. Ethan's smugness faltered for just a split second. The manager glanced away, fiddling with his tie. Kim shifted uncomfortably behind the desk, eyes wide, fingers frozen on the keyboard. But Marcus didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there until the silence grew too much for Ethan to tolerate. The manager cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "If you're done here," Ethan said, voice strained but carefully polite, "I'll have to ask you to move along. We don't want to disturb our other guests." Marcus's lip curled very slightly, a ghost of a smile without humor. He reached for the halves of his VIP pass and picked them up carefully, folding them once before slipping them back into his inside jacket pocket. "You're right," he said softly, tone deadly calm. "I'm done here." Ethan's eyes flickered, searching for triumph, but finding none. Marcus turned on his heel slowly, deliberately, refusing to rush, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him flustered. As he walked away, he didn't look back. He felt Ethan's gaze burning into the back of his suit, the cold weight of corporate complicity pressing down like a stone. He heard Kim exhale shakily, her chair squeaking as she shifted behind the counter, too intimidated to say anything to either man. He kept his strides even, measured, his breath steady even as his mind raced. For everyone who doesn't fit. The words echoed in his head with every step. Who didn't fit? He'd spent his entire life refusing to let that label stick. But they'd made their choice today. Now it was his turn. He kept walking, merging with the flow of travelers who hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything, wouldn't care even if they had. He let the terminal swallow him up, his hand brushing against his pocket where the torn pass rested like a promise. He wouldn't forget. He wouldn't forgive. Not in the way they expected. And as the fluorescent lights gleamed overhead, Marcus's face remained calm, but his eyes burned with an intent no one could mistake if they dared to meet them. Marcus didn't slow down as he left the customer service desk behind him. The words Ethan had spat so coldly, still ringing in his ears like a dare. For everyone who doesn't fit. The phrase looped in his mind with grim clarity. Every syllable a condemnation, not of him, but of the entire system that had enabled Amanda's smug cruelty and Ethan's bureaucratic bigotry. He walked through the terminal like a ghost, his steps silent, measured, his breathing steady but tight in his chest. Around him, the airport pulsed with its usual rhythm, announcements echoing from ceiling speakers, the shuffling of feet on tile, the rumble of rolling luggage. Nobody noticed him in any real way. Nobody cared. That suited him just fine for now. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt, feeling the weight of the torn VIP pass pressing against his chest inside his jacket pocket. He felt the ridged paper there like a wound. He wouldn't let it heal too soon. He needed it raw. He turned back toward the direction of the VIP lounge, not because he expected a different reception, but because he wasn't finished yet. He wouldn't be finished until they understood exactly what they'd done. As he approached the cordoned-off entrance, he saw Amanda leaning against the polished welcome podium with her arms crossed, her fingers tapping impatiently on her sleeve. She spotted him instantly, her lips twisting into a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She didn't wait for him to speak. Back again? She drawled, her tone exaggeratedly sweet, but her eyes hard as stone. Marcus didn't rise to the bait. He didn't even blink. He simply looked at her, steady and calm, as if waiting for her to show her cards. She tilted her head slightly, as if assessing something distasteful. "Look, I don't know how many times I have to say it," she continued, her voice dropping low and cold, her polite facade finally slipping away completely. "You don't belong here. You can wait outside the terminal if you want. That's as far as you go today." Her words hit like a slap, each one pronounced with precise cruelty, leaving no doubt it wasn't about rules or membership tiers. It was about something uglier, older, something she'd been taught was acceptable to enforce with a smile. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, feeling the tremor of restrained fury at the back of his throat. His shoulders squared automatically, his posture immaculate, radiating a dignified calm that only seemed to aggravate her further. He didn't speak. He didn't grant her any reaction. Amanda's eyes narrowed, flicking with irritation at his silence. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a hiss meant just for him. "This lounge isn't for people like you." There it was, finally said out loud with all the pretense stripped away. Marcus's jaw tightened. He could have laughed at the honesty of it if it hadn't been so vile. He raised one brow, just slightly, the only reaction he would give her. That infuriated her even more. She snapped her fingers twice in quick succession, a gesture of imperious command she clearly relished. "Security," she called, her voice sharp, cutting through the air like a siren. A pair of uniformed guards appeared almost immediately from their station, moving briskly but calmly, already trained to handle these quiet humiliations with practiced discretion. Amanda didn't even bother pretending to be polite this time. She pointed at Marcus with a stiff, accusatory finger, like he was something unclean. "He's not welcome here," she declared. "Please see that he waits outside the terminal. I don't want him anywhere near our lounge." One of the guards, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair, glanced at Marcus and sighed imperceptibly. He didn't look proud of the job, but he didn't argue either. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us," he said, voice low, trying for neutral. Marcus didn't resist. He didn't even speak. He simply looked at Amanda one more time, not with hatred or fear, but with a calm, surgical assessment that seemed to unnerve her more than any threat would have. She crossed her arms tighter over her chest, lips pursed, refusing to meet his eyes. The guards flanked Marcus gently but firmly, one slightly behind, one ahead, guiding him through the terminal without touching him, like a silent declaration that he didn't belong among the travelers who had purchased the right kind of welcome. As they passed the ropes of the VIP area, he heard Amanda's voice behind him, deliberately loud enough for him to catch. "Some people just can't accept the rules," she said airily, as if explaining it to no one in particular. One of the guards coughed uncomfortably but said nothing. Marcus didn't break stride. He refused to give her the satisfaction of turning around. They moved down the broad concourse, away from the expensive lounge furniture and the hushed conversations over craft cocktails, past the duty-free shops and luxury boutiques, until they reached the glass sliding doors that led out to the taxi stand. The doors parted with a cheerful chime that seemed mocking in the tense silence. The cool air from outside hit Marcus's face. The guard in front turned, expression apologetic but resigned. "This is as far as we can take you, sir," he said gently. Marcus nodded once, adjusting the lapel of his jacket, ensuring every fold was smooth, every line straight. "Understood," he said evenly. He didn't thank them. He didn't need to. They weren't the ones who needed to be convinced. He stepped through the doors onto the concrete walkway, the scent of fuel and exhaust thick in the breeze. Taxis idled in a neat line, drivers leaning against doors or talking into radios. People were arriving and departing, greetings and goodbyes playing out in choreographed bursts of human drama. Marcus paused, taking it in, feeling the space around him. He felt the barrier that had been erected between him and that polished, air-conditioned world behind the sliding glass. He let it settle in his chest like a stone. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his pocket and retrieved his phone. His fingers were steady. He unlocked the screen with a swipe, scrolled for the briefest moment, found the number he needed. He pressed call, lifted it to his ear, his voice low and calm when someone answered. He said only one word, "Proceed." Then he hung up without waiting for a reply. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply tucked the phone back into his jacket, adjusted his tie with a slow, precise tug, and exhaled once more, watching the taxis idle, their brake lights glowing red in the fading afternoon. Marcus stayed outside the terminal doors for a moment, feeling the chill of the late afternoon wind biting at his face as the automatic doors closed behind him with a smug hiss. He drew a breath so deep it seemed to scrape the base of his lungs, then let it out in a long, controlled exhale. The line of taxis waited patiently, drivers with tired eyes scanning the sidewalk for fares. Some travelers bustled past him with rolling luggage, glancing at him without really seeing him. He stood there, statuesque, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket and settling the collar carefully on his neck, as if to remind himself who he was. Not what they tried to reduce him to. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him crumble or lash out in fury. He turned deliberately back toward the terminal doors, stepping through them as they split obediently before him, and walked back inside. The warm air and filtered music of the terminal washed over him, incongruous to the tension crackling just beneath his skin. As he strode slowly through the corridor, he noticed people pausing, not because they wanted to help, not because they were horrified by what they'd seen, but because he was now an anomaly, a man who had been cast out, marked, humiliated. Their eyes flicked over him and then away just as quickly. A middle-aged man in a sharp business suit actually stepped slightly to the side as Marcus passed, avoiding even the possibility of a shoulder bump. A young woman with earbuds and glanced up saw his face and hurriedly returned her gaze to her phone, pretending to type. A pair of college-age travelers nudged each other and whispered, eyes darting to Marcus before looking away. No one said a word. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was complicit. Marcus felt every stare like a weight on his back, felt the space people gave him as if he carried some contaminant they didn't want to touch. He walked with precise control, ignoring them all, refusing to show the storm inside. He caught his reflection in the polished metal trim of a duty-free shop. He looked calm, too calm. His jaw was set like granite, his eyes distant and cold. He forced himself to relax his shoulders slightly and kept moving. Ahead of him, he spotted the glass-fronted VIP lounge entrance. The rope barrier was back in place, the gold stanchions gleaming. The oversized letters spelling out "exclusive" seemed to sneer at him. Inside, he could see Amanda once more leaning against the welcome podium, a self-satisfied tilt to her posture. She wasn't even watching for him anymore. She thought the problem had been solved. Ethan stood nearby, his back to Marcus, chatting quietly with another employee, a young woman with her hair tied back in a messy bun, the name tag reading Lisa. She was new, from the look of her, young, her posture a little too stiff, her uniform still crisp from minimal wear. She was nodding uncertainly at whatever Ethan was saying, eyes wide, voice too soft to hear. But as Marcus approached slowly, her gaze flicked past Ethan and landed on him. She froze. He saw the recognition dawn on her face. He saw the confusion, the concern. She took a half step forward as if to move around Ethan, as if to speak up. Marcus slowed. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. In that single moment, something raw and unspoken passed between them. She opened her mouth. Hesitation scrawled across her features, and Marcus watched as she tried to find the right words. But Ethan's head turned slightly. He caught the movement in his periphery. His easy, corporate smile didn't slip, but his eyes hardened like flint. He didn't even bother turning all the way to face Lisa. He simply murmured, his voice low but perfectly clear in the hush of the lounge foyer. "Not your place." Lisa flinched visibly. Her mouth closed with a soft click of teeth. Ethan turned the full weight of his corporate authority on her, his voice a study in bland menace. "We have a brand to protect," he added. The words fell like a gavel. Final. Lisa's shoulders slumped slightly. Her chin dipped, and she retreated the half step she'd taken forward, folding her hands in front of her neatly, eyes dropping to the floor. She didn't look at Marcus again. Ethan gave no further acknowledgement of the exchange. He turned back to Amanda with that same small, coldly approving nod, as if to say good work. Marcus watched the entire scene unfold with a tightness in his chest that threatened to shatter the careful composure he'd forced himself to maintain all day. He felt something twist inside him, something heavy, hot, and bitter. It wasn't the personal insult anymore. It wasn't even Amanda's cruelty, so easy and reflexive. It was Ethan's complete indifference. The easy way he controlled the narrative, the policy, the people. How he'd enforced the brand, as if the brand demanded silence. Complicity. Marcus's gaze shifted back to Lisa. He saw the shame burning on her cheeks, the way she wouldn't lift her eyes. He understood it too well. He'd been there once, young and scared, with bills to pay and no safety net. He didn't blame her, but he couldn't forgive it either. Not right now. Not yet. He felt the words Ethan had said at the complaint counter rattling around in his skull. For everyone who doesn't fit. He finally understood the brand they were protecting. It wasn't excellence. It wasn't service. It wasn't luxury. It was exclusion. It was control. It was making sure people like Marcus knew exactly where they didn't belong. He felt the coldness settle deeper in his bones, replacing the raw heat of anger with something more lethal. Clarity. He didn't break stride. He didn't say anything. He just watched as Ethan clapped Amanda on the shoulder. A brief laugh exchanged between them as they went back to their stations. The rope at the entrance stood gleaming, the line between who belonged and who didn't drawn in literal gold. And beyond it, customers relaxed in leather chairs, oblivious or uncaring that their comfort came at the price of someone else's humiliation. Marcus kept walking, letting the crowd swallow him again. But this time his mind was working, calculating, planning. He passed shops and gates, hearing announcements he didn't register, seeing faces he didn't bother to remember. He let his hand drift to his pocket, fingers brushing the phone he'd used earlier. He felt the weight of it, the power in it. He was already crafting the next move. Not a scream, not a brawl, but something surgical, permanent. He wouldn't ask permission. He wouldn't wait for them to see the wrong. He would make sure they couldn't ignore it. He kept walking. Marcus continued moving through the terminal with the same unbroken, deliberate pace. His thoughts a swirl of hard, gleaming edges he refused to let spill over into his expression. He could still feel the weight of the glances, the studied indifference, the hushed silences from the people who'd watched it happen, and then quickly pretended they hadn't seen anything at all. He felt every moment of it like a brand pressed to his skin. But he didn't break stride. He wouldn't give them that. Ahead, he saw the bright lighting of the VIP lounge entrance once more. He caught the glint of Amanda's blonde hair at the podium, her posture unmistakably smug, arms folded in a pose of absolute ownership of the space around her. Ethan stood slightly behind her, tapping at a tablet with a kind of smooth distraction that told Marcus he was still fully in control of everything going on. Marcus slowed for just an instant, enough to make eye contact with Amanda through the glass. He watched her expression change. It didn't falter or show fear. No, instead she smiled, slow and slicing, like a knife across velvet. She turned slightly to Ethan, nudging him with one elbow. Voice pitched just loud enough to be heard by the employees behind the counter, but quiet enough to maintain that air of fake discretion. "Problem solved," she said with satisfaction that dripped off every word. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He just made a small, bored noise in the back of his throat, acknowledging her, but offering no challenge. Amanda's lips curved tighter, enjoying the approval. She kept her eyes on Marcus even as she spoke to Ethan, a pointed sneer in her voice. "We don't need troublemakers ruining the lounge vibe." The words were so carefully casual, they were more cutting than if she'd screamed them. Ethan's mouth twitched. Marcus wasn't sure if it was amusement or annoyance at Amanda's lack of subtlety. But he didn't correct her. He didn't reprimand her. He let it sit there, validating it without actually saying the words himself. Marcus stood for one breath, two, on the edge of the rope line. He could have turned and walked away immediately. He could have let the doors slide shut between them for good. But he didn't. He stayed just long enough for the moment to land. He watched Amanda's expression, the satisfaction, the tiny glimmer of triumph in her eyes, the certainty that she'd won not because she was right, but because the rules were rigged in her favor. He watched Ethan glance at him once with mild disdain, then go back to his tablet. He saw the other staffers standing awkwardly behind the counter, eyes on their screens, on papers, anywhere but on the ugliness in front of them. Lisa was there too. She didn't meet his eyes this time. She seemed to shrink behind a register, her shoulders curved in on themselves. Marcus let the silence stretch until it felt thick enough to suffocate the entire space. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched them all, his gaze cool and level. Finally, with mechanical precision, he turned to leave, taking one slow step back toward the main concourse. But halfway through the turn, he paused. He let his head pivot just enough so his eyes met Amanda's one last time. His voice was low, measured, utterly calm, so calm it seemed to suck the air out of the moment. "I appreciate you showing me everything I needed to know today," he said. The words weren't thanks. They were a ledger, a record. Amanda's smile flickered. For just a breath, her smugness cracked, confusion darting across her face. She opened her mouth to fire something back, but Marcus was already turning fully, giving her nothing more. Ethan's head lifted fractionally. He didn't speak, but Marcus saw the tiniest movement of his jaw, a tightening there that suggested he'd heard the words, understood the threat lurking beneath their civility. Marcus didn't wait to see more. He started walking. Each step was deliberate, precise, almost regal. He let his breathing even out, the rage buried deeper now, under a thick layer of resolve. The terminal lights blurred slightly as he blinked hard once, banishing the heat behind his eyes. He would not give them tears. He would not give them any more of himself. Ahead, the terminal buzzed on as if nothing had happened. Screens flashed gate changes. Families clustered around suitcases. Solo travelers buried themselves in laptops and cheap thrillers. Flight attendants in crisp uniforms glided past with forced smiles. No one stopped him. No one asked him if he was okay. He wasn't surprised. He had expected this. He knew this. He passed a small seating area where a businessman in an expensive coat sipped coffee without meeting his gaze. He heard the rattle of a cleaning cart, the quiet squeak of wheels against tile. Every sound seemed too loud and too soft at the same time. He adjusted his tie with slow precision, fingers brushing the silk like it was armor. He felt the lump of the torn VIP pass in his pocket pressing against his ribs with every step. A reminder, a promise. He didn't check his phone, not yet, but he could feel it there, heavy, waiting. He had already made one call. He had already given one order. Proceed. He thought about what that would mean, what it was already setting in motion. He thought about Amanda's face as she realized too late what she'd really done. He thought about Ethan Smug, calculating detachment cracking when someone finally told him no. He didn't smile, not even a twitch of it. His face was carved from something cold and patient. He let his steps carry him deeper into the terminal, moving past newsstands, the aroma of overpriced food stalls, the muffled announcements for flights he'd never planned to board. He walked until he found a quiet alcove near the oversized windows looking out onto the tarmac. He stopped there. He stood still, watching the planes taxi slowly, the winking lights on their wings, the crews moving like ants with headsets and batons. He felt the fury ease just a fraction, replaced by focus. He exhaled slowly, fogging the glass in front of him, then stepped back to see the reflection of his own face. Calm, steady, unbroken. He adjusted his jacket, shoulders squared, spine straight. The man in the reflection didn't look humiliated. He looked ready. Marcus let his gaze linger on the tarmac for one last moment, watching the blinking lights of the aircraft as dusk draped the airport in a blanket of shimmering reflections on glass and steel. He drew one slow, deliberate breath before turning away from the window, his footsteps measured as he cut back through the terminal toward the main exit. The crowd seemed to part slightly around him without realizing it, instinctively moving aside for someone who carried himself with absolute control. The low rumble of rolling luggage wheels, the overhead announcements calling out boarding times and final warnings, the rustle of travelers jostling for position at gates, all of it blurred into a distant hum behind the focused beat of his own heart. He didn't look left or right. He didn't glance back at the gleaming doors of the VIP lounge that had shut him out so decisively. He didn't need to anymore. As he stepped through the sliding front doors of the terminal, the evening air struck him, brisk and sharp, clearing his head. The smell of fuel, exhaust, and concrete was strong enough to be grounding, real. He paused for only a moment, adjusting the line of his jacket, squaring his shoulders, and then he walked calmly toward the line of waiting cars. The taxi stand was chaotic with its endless parade of yellow and black cabs, drivers waving passengers over, luggage being tossed unceremoniously into trunks. But beyond that, near the private pickup zone, waited a sleek, black limousine with tinted windows that reflected the city lights in cold, perfect lines. The driver spotted Marcus immediately and stepped forward with crisp, professional precision. He was an older man with silver hair under his chauffeur's cap, posture impeccable despite the long hours on duty. He moved quickly to the rear passenger door and opened it smoothly, bowing his head in a gesture of respect that was anything but performative. "Mr. Taylor," he said with calm deference, voice low and certain, "the documents are ready for signature." Marcus paused only to nod once, his face unreadable, but his eyes glinting with hard purpose. He didn't speak as he entered the car, settling into the butter-soft leather seat with the ease of a man who did this often, who belonged here far more than any lounge Amanda or Ethan thought they were protecting. The door shut with a muted thud that seemed to cut off the noise of the terminal entirely. Inside the car, the air was warm and quiet, insulated from the chaos outside. Soft classical music played at a respectful volume from concealed speakers, a polished accent rather than an intrusion. The driver returned to his seat, speaking softly into a discreet microphone. "We're all set, sir." "Where to?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He let his gaze drift to the sleek panel between the front and back seats, where a thin leather folder sat waiting for him, secured with a polished metal clasp. He picked it up with careful fingers, flipped it open, and began reading, the papers crisp and new, filled with columns of figures and dense legal language that didn't faze him in the slightest. The limousine began to glide forward, pulling smoothly away from the curb as the driver took them through the carefully choreographed ballet of airport lanes. Outside the window, the city lights were beginning to shimmer, the sky deepening into indigo. Marcus's eyes moved over the pages with practiced efficiency, scanning for errors or inconsistencies he never found, because he trusted his team to ensure there wouldn't be any. But he still read every word, because that was who he was. He came to a particular page and tapped it once with a single, short fingernail, the sound small but decisive. He lifted his head and spoke calmly, voice steady as iron. "Purchase agreement for the terminal?" The driver nodded slightly, catching his eye in the rear-view mirror, but not holding the stare too long. "Yes, sir. Fully drafted and ready. Your lawyers confirmed the funding has been secured. All that's left is your signature and the transfer of funds. We can finalize it by end of day if you wish." Marcus's eyes didn't soften. They didn't harden either. They simply remained focused, burning with quiet certainty. He lowered his gaze to the document once more, reading a line that confirmed the property boundaries, the infrastructure, the valuation. $20 million for the entire terminal complex. The same one that had just told him so clearly he didn't belong there. He turned a page and found the signature line. His own name was already typed there in block letters, Marcus Taylor. He set the folder aside on the seat beside him with precise care. His hand drifted to the inside pocket of his suit, fingers brushing over the torn remains of the VIP pass Amanda had destroyed. He pulled them out, unfolded them carefully. He stared at them in the dim, soothing interior light of the limousine. The rip down the middle was clean, decisive, irrevocable. It was such a small thing in the grand scheme. Just paper. But it was the line they'd drawn in the sand, the boundary they'd thought would hold him back. He let the halves rest on his knee for a moment, breathing evenly, letting the memory of Amanda's smirk, Ethan's cold dismissal, the averted eyes of the other guests replay in perfect detail in his mind. Then he folded the scraps back together with slow precision and slipped them back into his pocket like a talisman. He leaned back into the seat, the fine leather creaking gently under his weight, and let his head rest against the headrest for a single, deliberate beat. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger was useful only as fuel. It didn't guide decisions. It didn't close deals. It didn't change systems. Resolve did. Planning did. Money did. He opened his eyes slowly and reached for the folder again, fingers brushing the cool leather. "Make sure it's finalized by end of day," he said quietly. But there was no question in his voice, only command. The driver nodded once more, voice calm through the intercom. "Understood, Mr. Taylor. I'll notify your team." Marcus didn't reply immediately. He simply watched the city lights streak by outside the tinted windows, his expression carved from something unyielding. He thought about the lounge's velvet rope, the way Amanda had looked at him like trash, the way Ethan had smiled while enforcing the rules that had no real purpose but to exclude. He thought about everyone who'd watched it happen and turned away. He thought about the brand they were protecting, and who decided what the brand even meant. He turned another page in the contract. His signature line waited patiently. Marcus let the hum of the limousine and the city blur around him as he tapped his signature onto the electronic tablet the driver handed back through the small sliding window. The digital ink sprawled across the line with clinical precision, his name sealing a deal that had been days in negotiation, accelerated to mere hours by a single humiliating experience. He didn't need to read the contract again. He knew every clause by heart, every obligation and privilege it granted. He simply verified the total at the bottom, the neat sum of $20 million, the price of a lesson he planned to deliver personally. When the limousine pulled up to the private entrance of his downtown law firm, his legal team was already waiting outside in tailored suits, files in hand, nerves alight with the buzz of a deal closing in record time. They rushed to open the door, greeting him with crisp nods and restrained excitement. He barely acknowledged them, taking the folder, flipping it open one last time to confirm the wire instructions. His voice was calm but allowed no space for debate. Make the transfer. Notify the airport's executive office immediately. I want the announcement handled tonight. Yes, Mr. Taylor, the senior partner replied, fingers already flying over his tablet. Marcus's eyes remained cold, trained on nothing in particular, but seeing every detail in his mind. He turned and walked into the lobby without waiting for them to finish, leaving behind the team that scrambled to keep pace with his command. Hours later, the airport itself bustled under banks of fluorescent lights, and the churn of late-night travelers arriving and departing in a dizzy choreography of rolling luggage, exhausted children, and business calls on speakerphone. Over at a hastily assembled press podium near the main terminal entrance, reporters with local station badges clustered around a makeshift stage. Their camera lights cut stark white circles through the air, catching the beads of sweat on the foreheads of airport PR staff trying to herd them into a semblance of order. The backdrop was a portable banner bearing the airport's logo, newly unrolled and still curling slightly at the corners. Ethan stood near the security cordon with his arms folded, confusion fighting with unease on his face. He hadn't been told why the airport's senior leadership had demanded he stand there in his formal manager's uniform, nor why Amanda had been summoned and forced to pin her badge neatly to her starched blouse even though her shift had technically ended. She tried to complain, tried to say she didn't need to be there. But the senior administrator, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair, had shut her down with one cold glance. Amanda now stood a few paces behind Ethan, arms folded tightly across her chest, fingers white on her biceps, eyes flicking left and right like she was looking for an exit that didn't exist. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them was taut as a piano wire. A small podium mic squealed once before the airport's director of operations cleared his throat. The cameras fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on such short notice. We're grateful for your flexibility. I'll be brief. He paused to shuffle his notes, the hush deepening. It's our pleasure to announce that as of this evening, the ownership and operational control of Terminal B has officially transferred to a new private investor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of press, reporters leaning in, pens poised. The director didn't smile, didn't perform. He just delivered the line with the same clinical precision Marcus had used to sign the documents. We're excited to welcome our new owner and investor, who just acquired the entire terminal for $20 million. The words seemed to ring out across the terminal, the hush so profound that even the mechanical voice announcing boarding for Flight 847 seemed to fade away. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He actually swayed for a second before planting his feet more firmly, his fingers digging into the meat of his arm. Amanda blinked, mouth falling open before she snapped it shut with a small, audible click of teeth. Her knuckles were pale where they pressed against her elbows. The director didn't glance at them. He just continued his prepared remarks about modernization, customer experience, a new commitment to inclusivity. But neither Ethan nor Amanda heard much after that first line. Their eyes met once, a shared moment of total understanding that they were no longer in control, that they had miscalculated badly. As the press conference wrapped up, flashbulbs popping, people scattered, talking in tight circles about the speed of the deal, the size of the investment. A few local business reporters were already typing articles with headlines that would hit the internet within the hour. But the real drama unfolded quietly, away from the cameras. In the lounge itself, the atmosphere had gone leaden. Amanda and Ethan had been told to return to their posts to await further instructions. They had obeyed without protest, though Amanda's face was twisted in a rictus of half-swallowed fury, half shock. Ethan's expression was a careful blank, but his eyes flicked constantly toward the entrance. He kept adjusting his tie as if it were choking him. The VIP rope was still there, the gleaming welcome podium, the soft lighting meant to soothe travelers into paying for overpriced cocktails, and the illusion of superiority. But the staff behind the counter were all hushed, glancing around nervously, checking their phones for updates none of them wanted to receive. Then, with the slow precision of a nightmare unfolding in real time, the entrance doors opened, and Marcus walked in. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were two members of the airport's senior executive committee, both in dark suits with company lapel pins. Behind them, a younger assistant struggled to keep up with a stack of folders and a tablet ready for Marcus's approval. He moved at a pace that wasn't hurried, but allowed no question who was setting the tempo. The staff behind the podium froze like deer caught in headlights. Amanda's arms fell to her sides. Ethan straightened reflexively, but his fingers trembled once before he clasped them behind his back to hide it. Marcus didn't break stride. He passed the rope barrier without slowing, one of the executives lifting it quickly so he wouldn't even need to acknowledge its presence. He stopped in front of the podium, his gaze sweeping across the room like a cold wind, noting every shift, every nervous glance, every forced smile. He didn't smile himself. He didn't need to. He let the silence grow oppressive, thick with all the things he could say, but chose not to yet. Then he spoke, voice calm, measured, but carrying perfectly to every corner of the room. "Good afternoon," he began. His eyes landed on Amanda, then Ethan, pinning them in place like insects on a specimen board. "I believe we have some policies to review." Marcus stood at the lounge entrance like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet because, quite literally, he now did. The words hung in the air like a sentence passed down from a judge. "I believe we have some policies to review." No one spoke. No one dared. Amanda's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed to find her voice. "This is," she began, but it broke on her tongue like a wave on rocks. Ethan cleared his throat, his professional mask cracking at the edges. He tried to recover it, squaring his shoulders, but his voice came out thin. "Mr. Taylor, perhaps we can arrange a private meeting too." Marcus cut him off with a slight, precise movement of his hand. The executives on either side of him didn't look at Ethan or Amanda. They kept their eyes forward, faces set in polite but unyielding neutrality. This was no longer their problem to solve. It had become Marcus's prerogative. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He let the silence answer for him before he finally spoke in a tone so calm it was surgical. "You'll get all the time you need to explain yourselves," he said. "But not to me." He turned slightly to one of the executives. "Make sure they're escorted to HR." Now, the executive nodded once without hesitation. "Of course, Mr. Taylor." Amanda's face lost the last of its color. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that had no humor in it. "Wait, you can't be serious," she sputtered, but her voice trembled, betraying the fear bubbling under the surface. Ethan didn't say anything. His eyes had gone flat and wary, a man calculating whether he could bluff or if it was time to fold. The two uniformed security staff, who'd once been summoned to throw Marcus out, now appeared at the entrance again. But this time, they didn't move toward him. They turned to Amanda and Ethan. Amanda recoiled half a step, mouth twisting in disbelief. "You can't just drag me off like some criminal," she hissed. Marcus didn't even bother looking at her. He spoke only to the executives. "Make sure they're treated professionally. No spectacle, but make sure they go." Amanda's protest dissolved into silence when the security officers motioned for her to come with them. She glanced at Ethan, eyes wide, silently begging for backup. Ethan couldn't even meet her gaze. His lips moved as if to say something, but nothing came out. He swallowed hard, face pale, before he turned stiffly to follow the security team himself. Marcus watched them go without satisfaction. This wasn't about personal revenge. He wasn't here to enjoy the spectacle. He was here to make sure it was the last time it would ever happen on his watch. The hallway outside the lounge fell into a hush that felt like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The other lounge staff stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide, clutching tablets and folders against their chests like shields. Lisa was there too. Her face was pale, but she didn't look away this time. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She just held his gaze. Marcus gave her a single small nod before turning to the senior executive beside him. "HR will handle the formal documentation," he asked quietly. The executive inclined his head. "Yes, sir. Amanda's termination papers were already drafted when you gave the order. She'll be formally notified today." Ethan's situation is a bit more complicated. We're preparing the investigation file now. Marcus's eyebrow twitched, inviting clarification without words. The executive cleared his throat. There's a history. Old complaints, allegations of discriminatory behavior that were, shall we say, deprioritized. We'll be reopening those immediately. Marcus's voice didn't change, but his eyes hardened. Good. Don't hide anything. Make sure the findings are public within the company. The executive swallowed once. Yes, sir. They walked together in silence for a few paces, the echo of their shoes a metronome of finality in a plush-carpeted corridor. Marcus paused at the large window overlooking the tarmac, watching another plane taxi in, its nose lights blazing in the gloom. He spoke quietly, without turning. What happens to Ethan? The executive hesitated. Pending the investigation, he'll be suspended. If the allegations are substantiated, and it seems they will be, he'll be offered mandatory retraining, with the option to return at a junior level if he completes it. No guarantees, of course. That's corporate policy. Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't have to say that it wasn't enough, but it was a start. It was accountability, and for once, the rules were being applied equally. He let his gaze drift down to the apron where ground crews worked under harsh floodlights, everything moving in perfect mechanical order. He thought about what fairness looked like, not in slogans or glossy marketing videos, but in real consequences for real harm. He wouldn't allow this to be brushed under a rug the moment he turned his back. Not now. Not ever. Behind him, Amanda was being walked down a side corridor, shoulders slumped, face drawn and pale, her eyes wet but defiant as she tried to hold herself together. She hissed words at the HR representative that Marcus couldn't hear, but it didn't matter. She was out. Done. Ethan followed with the posture of a man going to his own funeral, his carefully groomed hair looking absurdly out of place on his sagging frame. He didn't speak at all, eyes fixed on the floor. Marcus watched them go, then finally exhaled through his nose, steady and deliberate. He turned to the executive, who waited politely a few paces back. Send the memo company-wide, Marcus said calmly. Make it clear this isn't a one-off. This is policy now. The executive nodded. Understood. Marcus's voice was softer when he spoke next, but there was no less steel in it. No one enforces a culture of exclusion in my terminal, ever. The executive looked away, swallowing once more. We'll see it done, sir. Marcus turned then, fully, stepping away from the window, his eyes scanning the lounge that had gone eerily silent. The staff behind the counter still hadn't moved. They watched him warily, as if waiting to see if they'd be next. Lisa, however, straightened a little when he looked at her. He said nothing, but he gave her a brief, acknowledging look, a tiny concession that not everyone had failed the test. Then he walked forward, unhurried, letting the hush trail in his wake. Amanda left the HR office with her badge clutched in her fist so tightly the plastic bent, her knuckles white against its cheap shine, her breath shuddering in uneven pulls that caught in her throat like sobs she wouldn't release yet. She walked the long, echoing corridor of the staff wing with her suitcase rolling behind her, the wheels clacking over the seams in the linoleum like a mocking applause. No one stopped her. No one offered a sympathetic word. A few glanced at her and quickly turned away, pretending to be engrossed in their screens or in conversations that dried up when she drew too close. By the time she pushed out the staff exit into the cold dusk, the sky was painted in bruised shades of purple and fading gold, the wind biting through the thin fabric of her uniform blouse. She crossed the employee lot slowly, shivering, refusing to let herself cry even as the wind made her eyes water. At the far end was a small, poorly maintained park bench wedged next to the shuttle stop, its paint peeling in rough strips like old skin. She sat there heavily, the suitcase clattering as she let it drop beside her, both hands pressing against her forehead as she bent forward, elbows on her knees. The tears came then, unstoppable, hot tracks down wind-chilled cheeks. She tried to wipe them away with the heel of her hand, but only smeared the mascara in wide gray arcs beneath her eyes. Her breath hitched again, a sob breaking loose. She felt humiliated exposed, like the entire staff had seen her fall apart and would tell the story in low, mean voices for weeks. But worse than the embarrassment was the sick twist in her stomach when she remembered Marcus's calm face, his precise words that hadn't needed to be shouted to land like knives. She squeezed her eyes shut tighter. "I thought I was just enforcing rules," she whispered to the empty, wind-chilled parking lot. Her voice cracked, hoarse. "I didn't see I was enforcing hate." The words burned in her throat. She remembered his expression when he said he appreciated her showing him exactly who she was. She felt that same mirror held up now, forcing her to see herself without the armor of policy or procedure to hide behind. She shivered harder, tucking her arms around her ribs, the uniform she'd once been proud to wear suddenly feeling like a costume she'd outgrown overnight. She stayed there until the sky was properly dark, the wind chill numbing her cheeks and hands, crying until there was nothing left but ragged breathing and a hollow ache in her chest. Eventually, she forced herself up, gathered her bag, and walked toward the shuttle stand without looking back at the terminal she no longer had any claim to. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, the mood had shifted palpably in Marcus's newly claimed domain. The VIP lounge had been closed for staff retraining, and the blinds over the glass windows were drawn down tight, blocking the view of the posh furniture and marble counters from the curious gaze of passersby. A sign at the entrance read simply, "Under new management, improvements in progress," in corporate font that gave away nothing of the drama that had unfolded their days before. Marcus stood at the front of the room with his hands clasped behind his back, watching as the remaining staff filtered in slowly, reluctantly, unsure of what this new session would hold. Some avoided his gaze, shame written across their features in varying degrees. Others wore careful blank masks, determined to project professionalism even if they were burning inside with resentment or fear. And there was Ethan, standing stiffly at the back, his formal shirt crisp but his collar too tight, his hair carefully combed to maintain the appearance of order he felt he'd lost completely. He avoided Marcus's gaze at first, eyes darting to the side, but eventually the silence in the room drew him back in. Marcus didn't speak immediately. He let the hush settle, let the weight of expectation grow heavy. When he did, his voice was calm, quiet enough that everyone had to lean in just a little to hear him, making them complicit in listening. "I want you all to understand something," he began, each word precise, enunciated like a contract clause. "This terminal doesn't exist to make people feel small. It doesn't exist to sell the illusion of status by making someone else less. It exists to serve all of them, all of us." A ripple of uncomfortable shifting went through the room. A young barista swallowed hard. A senior hostess pressed her lips together and lowered her eyes. Marcus turned his head slowly until his gaze found Ethan's. The lounge manager didn't flinch this time, though his jaw flexed, betraying the tension coiled there. Marcus didn't look away. "Everyone makes mistakes," Marcus said, voice losing none of its steel despite the softened words. "I've made mine, but this terminal will be a place where we all do better." Ethan's lips parted like he might argue, but no words came. He closed them again, swallowing audibly. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, the carefully neutral mask cracking as shame and frustration fought for dominance on his face. Finally, with a visible effort, he lowered his gaze, nodding once. His voice was so low Marcus almost missed it. "Thank you," Ethan whispered hoarsely. He cleared his throat, wiped a hand over his mouth as if to catch the words before they spilled out again, then added, slightly stronger, "I want to try." The silence that followed wasn't the tense, brittle hush of fear from before. It was heavy, yes, but different, expectant waiting. Marcus let it linger, meeting each face in the room. Some held his gaze with a flicker of relief. Some couldn't yet. But the air felt changed, like the first lungful after storm. He turned away slowly, giving them space to process, his shoes quiet on the lounge's polished floor. He let his fingers drift to the inside pocket of his suit, brushing over the familiar ridged edge of the torn VIP pass he still kept there. A reminder, a promise, a contract of its own. He felt the words he'd spoken settle in his bones like truth, final and binding. He didn't smile, But there was a gentleness to his eyes now as he surveyed the room he now owned, the people he now led, the culture he had promised to change not with slogans, but with consequences and second chances both. He exhaled once, steady, letting the past days' anger finally bleed out into something else, something resolute. Then he straightened his spine, rolled back his shoulders, and faced them fully once more. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Tell us in the comments, which moment hit you the hardest? What would you have done in Marcus's place? And where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to hear your thoughts below.